Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I am so happy that you're choosing to spend your time with us today. So for those of you that are paying attention, you'll know that within the ag co-op space, M&A, mergers, consolidation is very much a flavor of what people are talking about and spend their time on right now. You know, look in the news, both ag media as well as general media, and you will see all sorts of stories around recently closed mergers, meaning completed mergers, membership that are getting ready to take up votes on proposed mergers, and even some boards and management teams that are exploring different structures of merging and consolidation, whether it's outright merger, a joint venture, strategic alliance, etc. There's a lot happening around this space. And I have some thoughts around why it's happening. It might be folks are looking for a way to weather the storm of the down cycle that we're in, to still be able to survive and thrive and accrue some benefit to their growers. Other times, I suspect that maybe folks are doing it more as a reactive response to a perceived threat, and that threat being, well, our legacy competitor just went through a merger, and suddenly we have a much larger competitor at the boundary of our trade area. And what are we doing to get bigger, to counteract that? You know, the presumption that scale and size is what you need to win in the marketplace. And so when all this is happening, I think it really heightens the importance of thinking critically, thinking clearly around what is your strategy for the future, what are you trying to become, and being very clear-eyed about how does merger and consolidation serve that? What has to be true for this to be well-aligned? But I don't want to opine on that by myself. And so I had the pleasure recently of meeting Glen Franzluebbers. Glen is a long-time cooperative veteran. He spent more than 30 years in the cooperative system, the majority of that within Central Valley Ag in Nebraska, a very successful and well-known co-op. There he helped to build and scale and grow their precision ag business. And then he also had a lot of responsibilities and experiences with evaluating, assessing, implementing, and adopting technology as a driver for creating value to growers and value to the business and the cooperative organization that he worked for. And so a really interesting intersection. Glen retired from CVA earlier this year and set up his own advisory firm, No Limit Ag. And so we had a chance to meet, talk about some of our the work that we do for the shared marketplace, some of our passions and observations, and we saw a lot of alignment. And Glen has a really great insider's perspective around some of the thinking of folks in the cooperative system and what they look at. And so I thought it'd be great to have him on the show. I'm going to let Glen tell you what he does at No Limit Ag, but just a little flavor of what we're going to talk about. In addition to breaking down merger and consolidation and co-ops and why we're pursuing them and what people hope to accomplish, we're going to talk about how do you make some of your assumptions explicit as kind of a prerequisite for merger success. Glen's going to share his journey around how do you stress test your own ideas to improve outcomes, particularly the ideas that you fall in love with, which are the most alluring, but obviously, or arguably the most dangerous ones to get too myopically devoted to. Glen's going to talk about the importance of reserving the right to get smarter as you go. Recognize you don't know everything. You're going to know more in the future than you know today. And how do you accelerate your journey to getting to know more so you can make better decisions? And we're even going to get into some spicy topics. The world has changed. And you even need to spend time discussing underlying assumptions around things like, should our agricultural cooperative be making money? Is the role of the co-op to generate profits beyond what they distribute to owners? Or is it meant to be a break-even entity that the shared prosperity really does mean a bottom line at zero? And so these are really important discussions. I was really excited to have the chance to talk with Glen. This show is about amplifying voices and aggregating perspectives and really trying to elevate our shared thinking around strategy execution. And he was a great candidate for it. So I want to say thank you for taking the time to tune in today and being part of the Pacesetter Pod. And with that, let's jump over to my conversation with Glen Franzluebbers of No Limit Ag. Glen, welcome to the Pacesetter Pod. I'm happy that you're here today. And with everything that's happening within the ag cooperative space around mergers and acquisitions, consolidation, strategic realignments, and folks trying to figure out what to do to both survive and then thrive in the market that we're in. I'm really excited to have someone with you and your experience in the show. Glenn, maybe you can start us off by telling us a bit about you, a little bit about your career, and then, what you're doing now at No Limit Ag.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Joe. Kind of my background, I grew up on a family farm in Nebraska, row crop, some cattle, some hogs. After that, went to UNL. I graduated from UNL in the early 90s. And then I had a couple short stints with a crop consulting company and with an independent ag retailer, doing crop consulting, agronomy work, sales work, a little bit of everything there. And then in the mid 90s, I was hired by, at that time, it was Ag Land Co-op. And Ag Land Co-op was one of the founding members of Central Valley Ag, or CVA, today. So I was hired on as a crop consultant and sales and timber truck driver and whatever it might be. So I did a little bit of everything. And then I started getting going with the precision ag in the mid 90s. And a very progressive company. And we had, I believe, one of the first, or very close to the first, ag chem soil election machines in the state, and started doing grid sampling and variable rate applications. So that kind of just fell into my lap while I was there. And from there on, I was either doing crop consulting and field scouting or precision ag. And as we merged and became CVA, I was lucky enough to lead the precision ag, the new technology, emerging markets division. So I was the director of professional ag services there. And that went on for 30 years. And great experience, great company. And I just recently this year retired from CVA after a little over 30 years. So I did start my own company, No Limit Ag. And kind of background, a couple things that I'm trying to do there is the first part was working with ag retailers, co-ops on their precision ag programs, doing annual reviews of the precision ag programs, doing strategic planning, looking at marketing, go-to-market strategies, kind of what's working, what's not, what's profitable, what are some of the new technologies that are going to be coming on board, and where you want to go in the future with it. So that's a pretty big area there. Kind of tying into that a little bit, kind of on the same wavelength, is working with companies that are going through M&As. As they're putting two companies together, you're also bringing two ag tech or precision ag programs together. And as we know, that can be kind of trying once in a while. I think it's really good to have an external unbiased mediator or moderator, whichever one you want to call it, to kind of help review both programs, whether it's 2, 3, however many companies are coming together, and get the best out of both worlds. These companies, a lot of them have been here for a long time. They have rich histories. There's a lot of pride. There's a lot of success. So how do you bring these programs together and get the best of both worlds without, to put it mildly, pissing off either half of the customer base or half of the employee base, and making them come together and all be on the same page, the buy-in, and have a successful program that's brought together. With my almost 35 years of experience in the industry, I've created a pretty extensive network. So kind of focusing in some of those areas on the innovation, the strategy, and the agronomy, tying ag tech and agronomy together. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, I think, one of the reasons that we, connected so well and had so many rich discussions early on when we met earlier this year was the shared passion around helping folks not just de-risk their merger and acquisition activities, but actually achieve the outcomes that they want and be disciplined in their thinking and in their planning and in their execution. And so having someone like you in the marketplace that has been through a number of merger transactions, who has led a division, who has done everything from driving a tender truck up to helping lead the deployment of new technology within a large organization, someone who can see around the corners is really valuable. And so one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on and help highlight your perspective and get your thoughts. Let's carry that through then. So right now, as we record this here in Q3 of 25, there's a lot of talk around not just the existing or the recent agricultural co-op consolidation, but kind of the continued pace and even some forward-looking activity. And I'm not going to give an exhaustive list here, but I was just looking at my notes last night and saying, okay, what have I been involved with directly through conversations, or what have I read about? And so in the recent news, for example, we have 3 co-ops in Ohio that are planning to propose a tri-party merger to their membership here later this year. In Nebraska, Aurora Cooperative and Farmers Union Cooperative Association are planning to come together. Was reading that Berwick Oil and Ag Partners Cooperative are also going to seek membership approval to merge, and the list goes on. Even below the headlines, though, Glenn, below the ones that have been publicly announced, there's a lot of other chatter out there among management teams and especially among the boards around, what's the potential for consolidation and merger activity? What's the rationale for it? Should we do it? Do we want to do it? So all that to be said, there's clearly a consolidation vibe, the vibe right now in M&A or for co-ops. From your perspective, what's driving this interest in consolidation? What are leaders hoping to gain by pursuing mergers?
Yeah, there's definitely a vibe with mergers and acquisitions here. And that goes both for the ag retail and co-ops and, even in the manufacturing side of things. But I think the biggest thing is, how do they get better? It's not always necessarily we have to be bigger to be better, but how do we get better by bringing 2 companies together? A lot of these companies will have strengths on one side of the aisle or the other. So each company can bring that individual strength to the merger and become better. We've all heard, kind of cliche, the 1 + 1 = 3, but that has to be accomplished. If you're just bringing 2 companies together and they're just going to offer the same products and services and have the same customer base and the same pricing strategy and the same sales numbers, you're really not gaining much. There's got to be those synergies in between. And I think that's what a lot of these companies are looking for, is where are the synergies in bringing these 2 together? Is it facilities? Is it one stronger in grain versus agronomy and vice versa? Is it equipment? Is it employees? Is it, it's a labor issue? Some of it could be the size for buying power. So I think there's a lot of those things that guys are looking at. I think that's kind of the way it's going, and I think it's going to continue to ramp up here for a while.
Yeah, I think ostensibly that seems to be the case. In some of my conversations, I do get the sense, or at least it seems anecdotally the case, that sometimes these are in fact a defense mechanism. So while someone will say we're trying to get better, in fact, the urge is to get bigger. You can be shark or you can be bait. And there's a presumption that if we're not going to the table, we're not going to the market or eventually going to the table to negotiate a merger, if we're not operating from a position of strength via our size, then we're going to be weakened on a relative basis. And so sometimes folks are responding to some of the other large merger activities that's happening at the borders of their trade area, right? Such these co-ops come together. And so now what are we going to do? Because suddenly we're a lot smaller. And I don't necessarily know what smaller means weaker in all cases. And so, do you see some of this kind of like, we do want to get bigger as a vehicle to getting better? Is that actually there?
I think it is. Yeah. I think there's some companies that it is a defense mechanism where everybody around them is growing. So it's like, okay, we have to grow. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but you need to make sure you're growing for the right reasons. and finding those synergies. And sometimes you can even take a step back with a merger if it's the wrong partner. Make sure you're looking for the right partner, making sure you have some of the same cultures, some of the same ideals. It's got to be something that's going to match for the company and bring them together. And you're doing it intentionally and for those good reasons, and not just, well, the neighbors are merging, so we have to merge. Just like the farmers, when first guy goes out to plant, second guy just goes. Conditions might not be right, but they're just going to go ahead and do it anyway because the neighbor's doing it. We want to make sure we're not doing that in the ag sector.
Yeah. Yeah, so because I think, underlying this, getting bigger doesn't necessarily make you better. Reason I say that is, if in a particular part of your business you are failing to execute, you're failing to bring something of differentiated value to your producer customers, offer something different to your trade area, that poor execution doesn't scale well. Right. So getting bigger and doing it at a bigger level is actually just amplifying the inefficiencies or where the pain is. And so I think you're right in that if we look at this and say, okay, we're looking in the mirror, we recognize that in terms of our precision ag offerings, we are trailing the competition, and the cost for us to meet the competition where they're at is so great that we probably are all better off collectively by working together and adopting it. But it also requires you to go into that merger with the willingness to not just personally admit, but then publicly state things are going to change. We are merging with our neighbor here because let's say our feed complex, our logistics, our quality, our custom blending capabilities are best in class, and we're going to bring this to more producers in our area. From a precision ag standpoint, we are struggling, and we are going to whole hog change the way we do business because this partner has a proven approach that's working. And I think sometimes it can be we're a little reluctant to make these public proclamations. We don't want to make promises. Sometimes the thinking is implicit rather than explicit. And so the things you're saying, I think, are really important, that they're also, to the degree that you can, make some explicit public proclamations going into it to set this table to say, look, this is good for us. It's good for our membership. It's good for our customers, but it's going to require some change.
Absolutely. That's spot on. And you have to be able to admit that and go into a strategic planning, or look at your 2, 3, 5-year goals going down the road of where you want to be. And the leadership team has to take note and kind of look in the mirror too a little bit and say, okay, what do we want to be? Do we want, just using, say, precision ag as an example, do we want it to be a profit center? Are we trying to gain revenue? Do we want it to have its own P&L? What's our goal for our ag tech? Is it just more or less a sales enablement tool where the profitability isn't front and center? It's more, we want to sell more fertilizer, we want to sell prescriptions, we want to sell fungicide, crop protection, add-ons, whatever that might be. We're looking at more of a sales enablement tool. So you kind of structure it a little bit different there. Is a defensive mechanism. The competition is offering all this stuff and the customers are asking for it. So do we need to offer it just to keep our customer base, or maybe even acquire some customers, but do it more as a defensive mechanism? And it's not necessarily something we're looking at making a bunch of money on, maybe not even selling a whole lot of product, but it's to keep those customers in your wheelhouse using the technology side of things. So a combination of them is okay, but whether it's ag tech, precision ag, whether it's the agronomy side, whether it's grain, feed, fuel, whatever, you kind of have to look at that and see, okay, what do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And then start working on the strategic side beyond that and planning out 3 to 5 years. We don't want to just be good at yesterday's needs, keep up with the competition. Let's just kind of keep going as we are. We'll keep up with the competition. Well, if you're going to go through a merger, you're going to want to step that up a notch. and bring something additional to your customers and be able to help acquire new customers and keep your existing customers and be able to service those customers that are going to be viable in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. They're going to require some different products and services they're going to be needing in a different level, depending on whether it's the technology, the labor, storage, whatever that might be. They're going to require a different level of service. So how do you start planning for that now and using those mergers to further build your offerings and be able to bring more products and services to the table? And financially wise too, it gives you a little bit deeper pockets, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
to invest more in R&D, to try new things, to kind of stick your neck out on a couple things that maybe seem a little out there right now, but in 3 to 5 years, it might be something that's mainstream.
Well, and I think so. One of the things you touched on several different times there in all those examples, which I think are rich and appropriate. The merger activity needs to be directly derived from your strategy, and your strategy needs to be future oriented. None of this is a radically new idea, and it's not something that we don't mention all the time on the show. We talk about this nearly every episode, but you need to have a point of view on the future. You need to have a point of view on, what role you're going to play in that future, who you're going to serve, how you're going to serve them, how that's going to generate value for your shareholders, for your employees, et cetera. And then to build the plan from there and identify where does a merger, where does an investment in technology, where does a change in process actually advance the organization towards that outcome. I do think that if we kind of go back to where we started in this, pursuing a merger as a defensive mechanism in response to the perceived threat of your neighbor going through a big merger, maybe that deal back ends to your strategy pretty nicely and it's strategically aligned. But I think it's foolish and reckless to assume that it does. And so I love some of these examples that you called out, but it's all about articulating the future and then also understanding what your objectives are. So this example, not to belabor it, but this example of, if you offer a soil mapping solution as part of within your precision ag portfolio and your set of services, especially prior to going into a merger, you should be crystal clear. Is precision ag meant to generate profit, or is it the wide mouth of the funnel? And I'm not going to opine on whether or not I think one is right or the other is wrong. Certainly, it'd be great if everything generates a profit, but sometimes you do things in a business for marginal upfront benefit because long-term it creates stickiness in the customer relationships. If you're not clear in the organization around, okay, precision ag for us, for example, it's the wide mouth of the funnel. We're not going to use it to drive meaningful bottom line results in the company. We're doing it for a longer term relationship investment. If you don't have that clarity going into a merger, and suddenly you're sitting across from this other company that actually has the completely opposite vision for their precision ag program, all of a sudden it doesn't become about whose technology and dispatch logistics process and information sharing process are we going to adopt. It suddenly becomes about, oh my gosh, at a fundamental operating model level, we are not aligned. And so I think that's why this needs to be derived from your strategy. You need to be explicit and clear, because that's the only way then that you can be explicit and clear in understanding what the counterparty's vision is. Otherwise, you're just basically signing up for a lot of friction, probably a lot of performance impact, and likely some value destruction.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. And kind of to add on to that, you need to be looking for what the problem is for customers and where you want to go with that. Instead of, I've heard, it might have even been on one of your podcasts, was talking about AI. You need to develop a program or a strategy around your internal initiatives, what the company's direction is going to be, and not say, okay, we have these products and services. How are we going to force it to work? We're going to incorporate AI into our company. Well, you should be looking and I think you'd mentioned this before, is you should be looking at the problem first and then using AI or a soil sampling program or modeling programs or irrigation program, whatever it might be, nitrogen, you look at those problems first and then you develop programs to address those. And then it also, as you're looking at a company bringing two together, when you define your strategy and you're going to start rolling forward, you got to make sure you can service it, support it, that it's scalable. Are you going to be happy with it just kind of staying the same? But it also has to be scalable. Do you have the right equipment? Do you have the right people? Do you have the facilities? What is it going to take in all links of those chain going down the line? If you're going to offer this and you're going to be a source enablement tool or you're going to be a profit center, okay, what is the growth projection of it? What's going to be required of people assets, physical assets, fertilizer storage, labor? How are you going to grow that? And do you have the resources and do you have the desire to continue to grow that and add? It might be something like development costs or software costs, logistics programs costs. Are you willing to invest in those to keep that scaling up? Because if you don't, and you're not investing in the assets, whether it's people, physical, whatever it is, and you can't service it, it's going to crash.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
An unanticipated question here, but something you just mentioned that I want to dig into a little bit. The idea of starting with what problem you want to solve. We hear that all the time, right? Everything from Simon Sinek's start with why in terms of engaging and motivating people to sell solutions, not products. It's pervasive, that idea. And it's so obvious. Like no one that I've heard necessarily, if they're intellectually honest, no one will dispute the rationale and the integrity of those statements. But yet we say them all the time. Why? Because we continue to forget them and not practice them. And so you spent 3 decades in the cooperative system, even longer than that in agribusiness. CVA's track record of performance is incredibly strong, but given your passion around it, I'm guessing there's also times where maybe you also had to remind yourself, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? So I guess my question here, Glenn, is just what does this tell us about the human condition or about agribusiness or about the nature of the way we have to work? Why do we have to keep learning this lesson over and over and over? Because co-ops are stacked to the ceiling with incredibly smart, talented, and dedicated people. Yeah. And yet we all constantly come back to, oh, shoot, what problem are we trying to solve? Like asking that question in a meeting will stop things in their track. Someone remind me what problem we're trying to solve? Like what are your thoughts there?
I think part of it comes down to experience and the knowledge and kind of getting stuck into what you know. I've been guilty before of, oh, this is the coolest technology. Everybody's going to love it. We're going to roll this out and it's just going to go like gangbusters. And then it doesn't. And I failed to look at what the market was telling us and what the customers were telling us. I read actually it was just yesterday, I read a quote on a newsletter, and it was J. Paul Getty from Getty Oil, old time oil tycoon. It said, in times of rapid change, experience could be your worst enemy. And I think that's part of it. We've been doing this for so long, we know the best ways to do everything. You kind of get stuck in that way of looking at things instead of kind of erasing it out of your mind and trying to think and look at something completely different and take into account like a merger partner. Okay, they're having this other product or service they're offering. How can we incorporate that in ours? It's different. It's not wrong. It's just different. And how can we bring those together? I think a lot of times it's just kind of an internal thing with us that this has worked for so long. There's been a lot of success in agriculture over the years, obviously a few ups and downs, but it's worked for so long. Why would we change? Why would we do something different?
It's almost as if there's an organizational inertia. You've been working at something for so long. And I just wonder if you were, again, this is me thinking out loud here, but if you were to institute an operating discipline in your company that every meeting, even the routine, twice a week stand-up meetings, started with what problem are we trying to solve here? And saying, we're trying to solve the problem of potential misalignment around our daily objectives of priorities in the plant, right? We're trying to solve for lack of communication or if it's more strategic and investment and future oriented, always rooting at what problem we're trying to solve. That does so much to clarify and cleanse the thinking and get the focus down, because I do think your point around experiences is interesting. If you have this cadre of people that have not only been in the business for decades, but have been in that business for decades and have been working with those same people for decades, there's an unspoken understanding around what direction we're going. And again, the moment that someone says, what problem are you trying to solve? You might all of a sudden realize how much daylight there is between the three of you, four of you, five of you. When you suddenly say, well, I'm working on solving this problem. Someone says, that's not even a problem anymore, Glenn. The hell are you doing? Right. And someone else says, you guys are both wrong. This is what we need to be working on. And so, I always find it interesting how much time we spend talking about the obvious things because we clearly forget them so routinely.
And we still don't learn.
Exactly.
So the other kind of thing that I look at is, it's come out the success triangle. It's like the three-legged stool. First, you have to look and see what the need is or the customer demand. Is that there? And that's part of what the problem we're trying to solve. And then we'll look at the technology. Is it ready? What's the technology readiness? Is it easy to use? Is the science there? Do you have the resources to bring it to market? Do you have the resources to support it, to service it? And why is it sustainable or viable long term? Is it something that's profitable? Is it scalable? What's it look like in 3 to 5 years? So if you look at all three of those, is the demand there? Is the technology ready? And is it viable long term? Then we can build that strategy against it and keep moving that thing forward.
And I would argue those kinds of questions are actually pressure testing or stress testing your strategy itself. So your strategy might be saying, we want to do X, Y, Z in the market for this particular segment, this type of grower, this, whatever it might be. And saying, okay, now we're making some assumptions. And so we're assuming that this is a customer demand. Have we validated that? Yes, we have. Okay, great. We're assuming that the technology is not just ready, it's proven to work. We can physically use it. It's usable. It'll be profitable, et cetera. So these are all ways to stress test your strategy before these huge investments.
Right. And I've been guilty in my past of skipping the first step and thinking, oh man, this is the greatest technology. It's long-term viable. The science is there. Customers are going to jump all over this. Well, if you don't do your homework before and know that demand is there, you can put in a lot of work with marketing, training, everything. And the customers look at it and say, well, I'm not paying for that. Wait a minute. Now we've got to take a step back, start all over.
Well, I think it's the problem of, it's easy to fall in love with great ideas. Mm-hmm. It's even easier when the way you qualify a great idea is a data point of one, meaning I love it. And sometimes in that excitement of an idea, we don't think to test it with others. Or maybe we're so smitten with the idea that we don't really like the idea of someone else poking holes in it. And so subconsciously, you don't do that. You don't go to validate and to test.
And I think it's super important to bounce some of those ideas off. Like you said, look at other input from other people. use your network, use a third party, use somebody that's not associated with your business and say, what do you think about this? Poke holes in it and be willing to let people poke holes in it, because constructive criticism is a good thing. It's how you get better.
Yep. And you always reserve the right to proceed despite feedback to the contrary of what you believe. And then you're explicitly saying, hey, look, the market is suggesting that perhaps this is not as attractive as we think it is, but our conviction is so strong, we're going to proceed. The old Henry Ford quote, if I'd asked the customers what they wanted, they would tell me faster horses. It's overused, but sometimes then at least that was very clear of saying we're going to do something the market hasn't told us.
And if it's not working, then you also have to learn how to fail successfully. If something isn't working, what's your exit strategy? How do you get out of that? There might be a few customers that like it, or some employees that like it. It's kind of working, but not really. So how do you backtrack and have an exit strategy? How do you fail at something like that successfully? And, is it partnering with somebody else to offer that service? Is it through a merger and the other company has the resources or has had success at it, and adopting some of those practices? How do you change that trajectory without causing issues internally with employees and leadership and customers? And what are some of those unintended consequences?
Yeah, the idea of failing successfully, that's not about the PR. That's not about spinning it for the news announcement that we're gonna divest of this technology, we're going to exit this partnership, we're going to cease this service offering. It's about harvesting the learnings and saying, okay, is there something that we're just not capable of doing that someone else can? Is there a better home for this service? If it truly is just not a need of the market, what did we learn in this process? And that's how you exit successfully. It's not about how you're going to spin it in the local paper.
Right. And, I've always kind of said too, especially with ag tech and even in agronomy, the way everything's changing and the industry, but especially in ag tech, with how everything's growing so fast and changing so fast and technology is increasing exponentially. I always kind of said we reserve the right to get smarter as we go, because it's going to change from year to year. So what's right and what we think is the way to go today might not be tomorrow. So with new advances, with new development, with AI, with whatever it is, we reserve the right to change our program a little bit, or maybe we have to pivot. Maybe what we were offering isn't working, but there's a new technology or a new company that came out that might be a perfect fit for us. So we have to be able to articulate that and get that message across to employees, leadership, customers. Okay, we're in the technology world. It's changing rapidly. Well, we tried this and it didn't quite go as planned, but we have this other option over here, and we need to pivot and be able to learn as we go.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground here, Glenn, from what's the merger vibes and co-ops, what's driving the interest, what are folks trying to accomplish, maybe where do those goals fall down, what needs to be true in terms of strategic planning and strategy definition in order to pursue effective mergers, solving the right problems, kind of, all in service of creating the company that you need in the future to serve your customers. I mean, there's a lot of other avenues we could probably go down with this, but there's something that has started to come up more and more. It's almost as a rhetorical or almost antagonistic question that I heard. And you and I had talked about this briefly a couple months back. And I wanted to get your perspective on this. So one of the things that has come up in the strategic planning efforts that we support with a number of co-ops has been, everything from, we need to be better at serving larger farmers, and then what's the implication for serving smaller farmers, and that kind of tension. We need to, fancy word, rationalize our asset base, which basically means we need to close some plants. there's that tension between serving the local producers with that legacy plant versus making that tough decision that's for the benefit of the long-term viability of the co-op. There's all these different tensions and these things that sometimes don't get talked about enough. But one that has come up several times in the recent past is, should this co-op even make money? And I know we're taking it's kind of a hard off ramp here from a prior topic, but I think it's really interesting because it gets down to, again, this at a fundamental operating philosophy. This idea that some people say, well, no, the co-op needs to produce generous financial returns, not all of which are distributed in the form of patronage, but much of that earnings are reinvested in the business to grow, to ensure that we can prosper into the future and serve the next generation of farmers. Whereas some folks say, no, a large net earnings number at the end of the year that's not distributed to the members is a violation of the purpose, right? This co-op is here to break even and to redistribute its earnings. If you want to tell us which is the right answer, you feel free to do that, Glenn. But how have you seen this tension throughout your career? Is it actually a tension, or did I just happen to stumble into a handful of cases where it was a necessary discussion? I guess from your standpoint, how should co-op boards and management teams be tackling this question of, should we even make money?
Yeah, it definitely is a tension. And I've ran into that too before. You kind of got to look at it as how the co-ops were originally formed and where they're at today. When they were originally formed, there was pretty much all small farmers. Everybody kind of joined together, and everybody pretty much had the same pricing. Everybody had the same services. Each location, every town would have a small co-op, and it would offer everything. And if there were things that didn't make money, oh well, that's just part of it. I want to come in and get some nuts and bolts and screws and some dog food and whatever it might be. And some of those things weren't profitable, but the old way of the co-op was you supply everything to everybody. The growers are the owners, and I completely get that. That makes sense. But as things are progressing now, as growers are getting bigger, you're needing bigger facilities, you're needing more equipment. Just covering the ground is so much more difficult now. And the needs of some of these growers that are getting bigger, there's got to be investment back into the company. I know there's still some people that, like you said, say the co-op shouldn't make money. It should be a break even. Can somewhat understand that theory, but I also have seen it from the other side where there has to be investment into future things. If you want this co-op, this company to be here in 50 years from now, you got to need more than break even. I know you need to be distributing back to the customers, but there also has to be some good growth potential in being able to invest in new facilities and fertilizer plants and grain facilities. And as this industry changes, and then there's also the side on the technology part of it. Whether you're talking precision ag technology, autonomous vehicle technology, IT, ERPs, mobile apps, things like that. That all takes a lot of money to implement and get it out to the customers. So to me, there's got to be some pretty good revenue to continue that growth. Because if you're not growing for the future customers, then every one of the co-ops will end up being in a merger position or not being able to make it financially in the future.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting observation that perhaps at inception, the idea of a largely break-even co-op net of patronage was the right model because differentiation was not just less intense, but it was less important.
Correct.
Right? And as ag, and as the world writ large, but ag also specifically has become more complex, has become faster paced, has become a larger consumer of technology, which has all kinds of impacts that ripple out through the business, that has changed the context in which these co-ops compete, and it's changed who they are serving. I think back to a conversation earlier this year where a board that we were working with had spent a lot of time in one meeting getting alignment, consensus, and expressing conviction around, we need to be better at serving larger farmers, because our assumption is in our trade area, there's going to be fewer, larger, more sophisticated, and frankly, more demanding growers in the future, right? So the sophistication and demands go up, the acreage is going to go up, the number we deal with is going to go down, meaning we have to be better at serving these guys. The next meeting, when we came back, they had said, we can't abandon the small farmer. And, we had to have that conversation to say, look, getting better at serving the big doesn't mean you're abandoning the small. But what is important is if you're not able to serve the big farmer, you're probably not going to be around to serve the small one either. And for in that context, it was sort of getting them to understand that you are going to make a strategic decision to improve your capability in this one way, but you cannot say that means we don't care about the other producers.
I was just going to say that same thing, is when you're servicing large farmers, that doesn't mean you have to ignore or not service the smaller farmers. They're still going to be around. There's a bunch of them out there. They're not all going to go away. So there still needs to be a way to service those. And I think there's a line there where you can service them both. But in order to service them both, you have to be making enough money to be able to invest in the large growers, the infrastructure, all that, to continue to service the smaller ones.
Yep, 100%. And the ironic part is, too, while the way that you go about investing in your assets, the way you go about reconfiguring your processes and your service approach, while the reason for making those changes and making those investments might be driven by meeting the needs of the large producers, and so that can feel like a moment where the small guy is left out, right? I didn't ask for this. I don't need a 60,000 bushel per hour leg. I don't need these things. That's, they're doing this to serve this handful of incredibly large growers in our area. So while the reason up front might be heavily concentrated with one segment of the producer base, once those investments are in place, the benefits are widely distributed. And I think it's also a matter of helping those folks understand that, yes, maybe you're not asking for this, but it's necessary for us. And let's articulate how specifically you're going to benefit from this. The investments you make aren't only, the value doesn't only accrue to one set of customers. I also think there's this moment too of, and I'm going to paint with a very broad brush here. So I reserve the right, and I frankly expect to be wrong depending on which board we're talking about. But I do see boards, co-op boards currently that are struggling sometimes with the time horizon against which they're making decisions. Because we've got folks that have, whether it's via lack of succession planning, lack of exit options locally, all their neighbors are the same age and looking to get out. Maybe they held on because it was during COVID and we were coming off some very good years for farm income, whatever the reason is. We've got this, we do have a significant number of people who are going to need to exit at some point. And because it's not this metered transition of we've got 10% of our board in terms of the age demographic turning over every cycle, and we're slowly replacing them with newer and younger farmers, because you have this kind of bulge of older experienced producers. Because the buildup is meaning that there's this huge transition happening. And a lot of times I'm seeing boards getting caught up in, you're making decisions that are not going to benefit anybody sitting at that table. Because by the time that those investments come to actually be generating value at scale, you'll no longer be sitting in the board, sir or ma'am. You may not even be farming. You might be at your place in Florida or Arizona, right? And so I do think the fact that we have this kind of this pressure building around the transition, it creates a lot of pressure in those rooms, and we have to constantly remind ourselves that, as uncomfortable as it is, you're making decisions for a future that you may not necessarily participate in. And I think that's just a hard thing to do, emotionally, intellectually, whether it's in your personal life, professional life, etc.
Absolutely. That's a fine line to cross. It's very emotional, and it's a lot of the things today. It's an instant gratification world. And some of these things that you're talking about is an instant gratification. It's a delayed gratification. And those decisions have to be able to be made. knowing that, okay, I'm farming today, or I'm on the board today, or I'm on the leadership team today of a company, in 5 years, 10 years, might not be there. And so you might not reap those rewards, but if we want strong companies, we want strong future, be here for the next generations, we've got to be looking forward like that on what's going to be the best for the company 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Absolutely. Well, Glen, this has been a real pleasure to get your perspective and harvest some of the value from your experiences. So kind of back to where we started, No Limit Ag. So who should reach out to you, and maybe give us a recap on what problems it is that you're solving?
Sure. The problems I'm solving, working with co-ops, retailers on fine-tuning their precision ag program, having an external, unbiased person take a look at it, what's working, what's not, what needs to change, how do we become more profitable? Is it a labor thing? Is it an asset thing? Is it different services, products, programming, marketing, whatever that might be? It's also in the merger and acquisition space, how do you bring two together and do it successfully? And then it's also doing some special projects. And like I mentioned, doing some contract work and using my network connections to help out maybe some startups to gain some market access, utilizing my expertise in the combination of agronomy and technology, tying the agronomics to the technology. Because if you're just looking at the technology and not what the benefit is going to be on the agronomic side, the efficiency side, whatever that might be, it's going to fail. So those are the groups that I'm going to be working with and kind of the direction I'm targeting.
Yeah, and I will just say from my perspective, in addition to you giving generously of your thoughts and experiences, I think there's a number of people in our industry that are good at one or the other. They're great at the technology side, or they're great at running the precision ag business. They might not be great at both. And oftentimes if they are, they might be representing a specific solution in the marketplace. And so I would encourage our listeners who something that Glen has said kind of resonated with you, a need that you might have, an opportunity you might be exploring, reach out to Glen, because in addition to having strength on both the running and building a precision ag business within the cooperative system, as well as understanding the application, use cases, and deployment of technology, Glen's out here agnostic of those solutions to help you make better decisions. And so certainly be sure to reach out to Glen, and we'll make sure that we've got all your contact information, Glen, in the show notes. And I just want to say thanks again for taking the time to join us today here on the Pacesetter Pod.
You bet. Appreciated the conversation. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am sure that you found something not just of interest, but of actionable value in our conversation today. And assuming you did, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Please consider sharing this episode with someone that you think would also find similar benefit. It's the very best way you can support this show, and the best way to help us elevate thinking around strategy execution across the ag supply chain. Thanks for joining. I look forward to having you again right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.